can you refuse to look at the crime scene evidence when you're the district attorney? You're responsible for giving a man the death penalty or not giving the man a death penalty, and you won't look at the evidence. We all know he's incompetent at finishing an investigation, but that's just ludicrous. Even if you don't want to look, you've got to look.
When I say the word prosecutor, what phrase immediately comes to mind? Tough on crime? Aggressive? Overbearing and rigid in appearance? You ask my wife and she might jump right to arrogant. I'll admit that these stereotypes aren't too far off base, but I want to let you in on a little secret. That's exactly what we're taught. We are taught to confidently stride into that courtroom with that tough, hardened exterior because that's what our community expects.
I tell you what the community expects is a thorough going over an extensive, exhaustive murder case where we know what happened and we know all the players involved. That's what the community expects.
Prosecutors are honored to stand before judges and juries every day, advocating on behalf of those who have been injured or killed. And I've accepted that persona, being the voice for the voiceless.
Being the voice for the mistress, not doing your job properly, getting caught drink driving. I mean, it's not a good look.
Entering into courtrooms more times than I can count, carrying the weight of someone else's trauma. The murder victim's family, the survivor, the young child victimized in ways we can't possibly understand. But not once during law school or in the early days of my career did anyone tell me that this job could impact me too.
Did they tell you in law school to do all the evidence, to look at all the evidence, to test all the evidence, to interrogate people that deleted evidence? Did they tell you that in law school? Mickey boy?
I remember as a very young lawyer, the first time I was asked to attend an autopsy. The victim was an 11-year-old boy. He had been strangled to death, placed in a duffel bag, thrown in a construction dumpster in the middle of January. His body was frozen solid. No one should be victimized that way. And no one should ever have to experience what I saw and heard that day. I could only take a few minutes in that autopsy room before I had to excuse myself for my own mental health. And instead of being met with sympathy, I was teased, handed a stick of gum, and told to get back in there. The best way to deal with it is simply to get back to work.
Sounds horrific, I'll be honest. That's not nice for anyone.
Next 25 years, on child, homicides, domestic violence, adult. I rose through the ranks from that young deputy district attorney to district attorney. I watched as passionate criminal justice professionals burned out, quit, self-medicated with alcohol.
That's where his DUI comes in. He was deputy then. Look, I've no doubt that DA Rourke is a decent man. I've no doubt that he's put a lot of bad people away. Let's be honest. He's not going to be an evil person, but he didn't really do his job on the Watts case, did he? He didn't do a thorough job. He didn't do an extensive job. He didn't do an exhaustive job on the case. He wanted it all tied up in a nice, pretty little bow, delivered on his desk, crisp put away, boom. Job done. Can I have your vote, please? That's what he was after, votes.
Stop to think about why. And then in 2018, my wife and a close friend of hers invited a well-known television journalist named Anastasia Bolton onto their podcast.
Onto the podcast that you're allowed to go on and talk about the Chris Watts case, but none of us are allowed to discuss it. See the hypocrisy there, Mickey?
During numerous tragedies over the course of her career, to include the Aurora Theater shooting. And she talked about how it impacted her and her camera person. And as I listened, it made complete sense to me. For after all, she too was there, hearing the sounds, smelling the smells, seeing the faces of our first responders. She called it vicarious trauma, the emotional residue.
It's got to affect you dealing with these cases all the time. Even with just dealing with cases on YouTube and looking into them, it affects you mentally. So I don't know how it would affect you if you were actually in the thick of it, like a detective. It probably affects you quite deep, especially if you're emergency services, first responders, you're the boots on the ground. Not so much the DA who sits in his office trying to tie up cases in a nice little bow, but the actual people who are on the ground, emergency staff, they have got to suffer mentally from it, because I know it affects my thinking sometimes when you have to take a step back now and again. So especially back in the day where there was no mental health services, it wasn't really talked about mental health. So it must affect
stories and witnessing the fear, the pain, the terror that others have experienced. Some people call it the cost of caring. I had heard that term before, vicarious trauma, in relation to our military and our first responders, law enforcement, fire, emergency medical professionals.
I haven't seen this, by the way. I'm watching it now. This is my reaction while I'm watching it. So I honestly haven't seen it yet. But I said first responders, didn't I?
Yet still I had no recognition that vicarious trauma could impact me too. It was just part of the job, right? August 2018, Frederick, Colorado. A man whose name will not come out of my mouth stood before the television cameras. Feigned concern.
Why won't he say his name? It's very dramatic, isn't it? I won't say his name. His name will not come out of my mouth. Why? That's just stupid. He said that the kids were doing cartwheels and they had blonde hair. Well, that's completely wrong. So we can't care that much. Look, I'm not saying he didn't care, because that's just stupid and ludicrous. But come on, don't act all high and mighty saying his name won't come out of my mouth when you're saying that the kids were doing cartwheels and they had blonde hair, long blonde hair. Give me a break.
And lied to the public, claiming he needed the information about the whereabouts of his missing wife and 2 young daughters. But something was off. And within just a matter of a couple of days, we learned that this was a calculated charade by a monster who had annihilated his family, murdered his wife, his 4-year-old daughter, and his 3-year-old daughter.
What about the bombshell evidence? Where is the bombshell evidence? We want to see the bombshell evidence. We want to see all the tests conducted. We want to see all the truck tests conducted. Where's the bombshell evidence, Mickey?
He buried his wife and their unborn son in a shallow grave outside of an oil tank battery. He smothered his daughters with his own hands and shoved them into those oil tanks through an 8-inch diameter hatch at the top of those tanks. Not the same tank, different tanks, thereby ensuring that they would be alone in death.
We all know it's disgusting what he did, and that's one of the major grievances, is that he didn't keep them together. He couldn't even keep them together in death. It blows my mind, like how he thought that this would be a much better option than divorce.
Once again, my partners and I readied ourselves to enter into that courtroom to be the voice for the innocent, to be the voice for that young pregnant mother and her 2 daughters. We were going to get justice for her killer. At the time, as the district...
At the cost of what, though? Because you didn't do it properly. You didn't do everything that you should have done.
Attorney, I had a team of lawyers and investigators working for me, and I let them take the lead early in this investigation. And for my own mental health, I refused to look at the crime scene evidence. But at the time, Colorado still had the death penalty.
How can you refuse to look at the crime scene evidence when you're the district attorney? You're responsible for giving a man the death penalty or not giving the man a death penalty, and you won't look at the evidence. We all know he's incompetent at finishing an investigation, but that's just ludicrous. Even if you don't want to look, you've got to look. What a stupid statement to make.
And I knew that if we were going to consider seeking the ultimate punishment, I had to see for myself what he had done. So one night that fall, sitting on my couch next to my wife, I opened my laptop to look at the photos which documented the recovery of those little girls' bodies from those oil tanks by hazardous materials crews. What I saw were two little blonde girls' lifeless bodies covered in oil. I mentioned their hair color for this simple reason. I too had a 3.5-year-old daughter with long blonde hair. And as I looked at those photos, I looked up at my daughter singing and dancing in my living room, and something happened. I was lightheaded. I got tunnel vision. I felt like I was going to faint, and I felt like I was going to throw up.
I understand the photos would be upsetting, but this is all just for dramatic effect, this. And they didn't have long blonde hair.
My wife watched as a very dark shadow cast over my face, and it had finally happened. All of the evil, all of the pain, all of the trauma that I had seen finally spilled over. That was the moment I realized this job had changed me forever. Where I live in Weld County, Colorado, we have a robust oil and gas industry. And you can't hardly drive down a rural county road without seeing a cluster of oil tanks. And to this day, every time I drive by one of those tanks, I see those little girls and I see my daughter.
I think everybody would put themselves in that position of their own children. If you've got children, it's hard not to see or at least think about what he done. I don't want to take anything away from the district attorney, because he would have had to look at some horrific photographs, ones that we haven't seen, ones I don't want to see. So I'm not taking that away from him at all. He did have a difficult job in that respect, where he would have had to view those photos. So I'm not taking that away from him. But they didn't do a decent investigation. They wanted it tied up, like I said, with a little bow. However you want to slice and dice it, everything wasn't looked at, and that's why there's so many questions left on the table. And what? And where is the bombshell evidence? Where is the bombshell evidence?
Place that I found myself in the fall of 2018, and I am filled with rage for what those little girls endured, for what all those victims endured. Vicarious trauma is real. Not just for prosecutors. It is a daily reality for legal secretaries, victim advocates, investigators, attorneys, and supervisors. That case changed all of us, but it also made me realize...
Detective Baumhofer had to retire over it. I think he had PTSD. I'm not 100% on that, but I think that he had to retire after that case. Now, whether he was due for retirement or not, I don't know, but I think I've seen or I've heard reports, I could be wrong, that he retired after this case. I hope he's okay now. Genuinely, I hope he's okay. Because what these guys went through having to view must have been horrific.
Is not a sign of weakness. Instead, we as criminal justice professionals must proactively take care of ourselves and one another. That old narrative of the tough, aggressive prosecutor who ignores his or her own mental health for the sake of the job is being crumpled up and thrown away like the trash that it is. Because the Frederick case isn't some outlier or anomaly. Criminal justice professionals see the worst that human beings can do to one another on a daily basis. When I think back to what I wish I knew when I was a young prosecutor, or what I wish I had as a young prosecutor, it was for a culture which gave me permission, when I was having a bad day, to simply walk down the hall to someone's office who I trust, shut the door, and talk about everything that was going through my mind. So we decided to do just that. Create a peer support system in our office for our deputy district attorneys, our investigators, our victim advocates, our administrators.
That's a good idea. At least they put something in place to deal with these sort of subjects, because mentally it must be bad for them having to go through all this. So I am sympathetic towards him there.
Professionals. Under the guidance of a former law enforcement officer and trained counselor, we recruited volunteers for a rigorous training program to become a member of this peer support team. This team, including employees from my own office, are not trained to provide professional mental health counseling, but instead to be that immediate resource, to lend an ear to a colleague who simply needs to talk about everything that's going through their mind at the time. No appointment is necessary, and no time off of work. It is as simple as a phone call to say, "Can I talk to you in your capacity as a peer support officer or member?"
Maybe they need the time off work if they're mentally disturbed. Maybe they need that period of respite.
Then we set aside an office in a quiet corner of our building, complete with comfortable chairs, resource materials, and a welcoming atmosphere. But it's not just our office. We are part of a nationwide movement of prosecutors challenging vicarious trauma head on. In 2019, the National District Attorneys Association recognized this need, and I was fortunate enough to be invited as a founding member of the Wellbeing Task Force. For those of you paying attention, yes, that's the WTF.
WTF. WTF. What the fuck about investigating Nicole Kessinger? That's what TF. What TF? That's WTF. What the fuck? Where's her investigation?
We as leaders in the prosecution community came together and said, enough is enough. We are tired of losing passionate criminal justice professionals to burnout, addiction, and suicide. We knew we had to shift the narrative away from, it's just part of the job, to, we must be better for one another. Already we published hundreds of articles and blogs for lawyers and criminal justice professionals talking about what vicarious trauma is, how it impacts you and your coworkers, and how to get support. Last year, we started a well-being app, and the task force hosted its first well-being annual conference. And no, it wasn't just yoga and meditation. 10 years ago, the investigation community created a program called Start by Believing. Because we know that if a victim feels supported and believed during their initial outcry, it can make a profound difference in their life. As the district attorney, I now get to train the next generation of prosecutors. And I have found this same philosophy applies to a criminal justice professional who's struggling with trauma.
Well, I hope you train them to do an investigation thoroughly and to the end, to its fulfillment.
We now train them to say, I need help, and it will be welcomed, and not met with, it's just part of the job. I believe you. What can I do to support you? Is what they should expect. This is not change for change's sake. This is a generational reckoning, institutional reckoning, a generational shift which says we must be better. We must embrace these truths that vicarious trauma is real and that we must be better for one another. Caring for you, our communities, starts with caring for ourselves. To stand up and be the voice of the voiceless, we must take care of ourselves and each other. Even this aggressive, rigid career prosecutor finally asked for help. You can too, and it will make all the difference. Thank you.
First, thanks for doing this.
Sure.
Speaking with us, we appreciate it.
You bet.
First, I just want to talk about the speed of this case.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these murders happened just 3 months ago in August. This case is now already wrapped up with the plea and the sentencing today. How unusual is it to have such a high-profile case wrap up so quickly?
Oh, I think it's very unusual. I can't really speak to the speed from the
Very unusual to wrap it up that quickly. His own words.
defense side, what their thought process was. I think that once we had an arrangement or an agreement where the death penalty was taken off the table, I think that makes it all the more likely that it is going to resolve that quickly. But I talked to Shanann's family after this today, and I said, I hope this gives a little bit of closure. It was fast, but anything we can do to try to get them on the road to healing is important. And so from that perspective, I appreciate the fact that it got done this quickly.
There's a lot of people that will disagree with that.
I don't know this for a fact, but there's probably more people than you've seen in the courtroom in Weld County before, in terms of how many people were out in the hallways and in the overflow room, and so many emotions in that courtroom. What was it like to just be a part of that today, and how much thought goes into making sure those emotions don't go overboard with just in the courtroom?
We had a lot of conversations about the different things that could go wrong, the different obstacles. It went exceptionally smoothly. I think that the overflow courtroom and the number of people that were here today demonstrates the importance that this case had to this community. From the very beginning, on August 13th, this has been a case that has absolutely rocked not just Frederick, but the surrounding towns, the entire community. And I think we saw that in the courtroom today.
Judge Kopkow called Watts' actions in the courtroom today the most inhumane he had seen in 17 years as a judge. In this case, are these actions the most inhumane you've seen as a prosecutor?
I've been a prosecutor for 21 years, and I couldn't possibly imagine anything worse than what we saw in this. Not just the fact that this man annihilated his family, but to have the utter disrespect for their remains by dumping them in oil tanks and burying them out in eastern Colorado.
I've got a UK case coming up, which I'm filming at the minute, and it's just as bad as Chris Watts. Just as bad. Another family annihilator that I've been working on.
Really is something that shocked the conscience of all of us.
This case, Chris Watts will spend the rest of his life in prison, but he could have faced the death penalty here. If his family had wanted you to pursue the death penalty, would you have?
That's a tough question. They were so adamant that they did not.
You should have the death penalty. If you've unalived children, you should have the death penalty. No ifs, no buts. Do not pass go. Do not collect 200. Simple as that.
Want me to seek the death penalty? That really drove our discussions and our thought processes from the very beginning. Had it been different, had they come to me and said, absolutely, we want you to seek the death penalty, no ifs, ands, or buts, I probably would have. I put more stock in the desires, the beliefs, the family views on what we do in a case like this than anything else. I met with all our law enforcement partners.
I would take into account the families. If the families didn't want it, then maybe let it go. But it's a tough one.
I met with the defense. I met with the sheriff's office. I met with supervisors in my office. But I met with her family first because I knew that every meeting that I would go to would ask me, well, what does the victim's family want? And that's really what drove our decision.
As recently as last year, though, I know Governor Hickenlooper indicated he was open to commuting the death sentence of Nathan Dunlap, who shot and killed the 4 employees at the Chuck E. Cheese in Aurora. And Governor-elect Polis has said that he would vote for a bill, sign a bill to abolish the death penalty in Colorado. Would that have weighed in, though? You've kind of referred to that before, into your decision.
Oh, sure. It absolutely did weigh into our decision because we had to have a conversation with Shanann's family about the realities that we could go out and seek the death.
These subtitles are YouTube, so where it's spelt Shanann's name wrong, I would normally go back and correct that, but I can't go back and correct it on this, okay? So apologies for that.
Penalty, get the death penalty, and at some point have a governor or a legislature who abolished the death penalty, and it all would be for naught. We knew that this was a contentious election year here in Colorado.
There we go. Out of his own mouth, we knew it was an election year. So the decision was just as much political as it was for the family, if not more so. You can't tell me that he just listened to the families. He said out of his own mouth, and I think that would have weighed heavily more on him politically than the family. Just my opinion. Put in the comments what you think. Do you think he was politically motivated, or do you think he did it for the family? I think he was politically motivated.
to be, and I had to talk with her family about that as well. So that certainly played a role in some of the decision making as well.
In your career, have you ever encouraged a family to seek the death penalty?
No, I don't think that's my role to encourage them ever. I think that is extremely personal to each family, and I honestly want them to tell me exactly what they want. I don't want to persuade them one way or another.
Because this case brings up the whole question about the death penalty, I mean, as a prosecutor, would you support the state abolishing it?
No, I am a strong supporter of the death penalty. Chris Watts was certainly eligible for the death penalty. I think the death penalty is on the books currently for defendants just like him. At the same time, I recognize the realities. Nathan Dunlap, as you talked about, is still alive. He was convicted more than 20 years ago. When I have a mom who is sitting across the table from me in her kitchen saying, please don't do this, I can't be a part of the criminal justice system for the next 20 years, awfully tough for me to say, I understand your feelings, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Are you a father?
I am a father.
How did this case impact you personally as a father?
Terribly. We have a little girl at home. She's 3 years old and she has blonde hair, just like the victims in this case. And so I would come home after working on this case all day, and we'd see her bouncing around in the living room, and my thoughts immediately went to Bella and Celeste. Even beyond that, I can't fathom what went through a man's mind when he is not just killing his wife, but killing his children. Senseless doesn't even begin to describe what he did. It's just sickening.
Did any part of you think that Chris Watts would speak at today's sentencing and explain why he did what he did?
No chance. He's too much of a coward to do that. He couldn't even. Far too much of a coward. He's never had a backbone in his life. He would never, ever, ever stand up in that courtroom and explain anything. I think it should have been part of his plea deal to explain exactly what he knew, exactly when he knew it, exactly what he told other people, what's the bombshell evidence? I want to know the bombshell evidence.
I didn't think he would. I called him out. I did that intentionally as I was preparing my remarks. I wanted to see if I could get him tell the truth, give the family, not just Shanann's family, give his own family some answer to the question of why. But at the same time, I knew that even if he did that, it would ring so incredibly hollow. There's no explanation for what he did that can satisfy that desire to know why in anyone.
And his family, his parents were asking him to do that. Do you think at some point he will?
No, I don't. I think he heard those pleas from me, from his family. I don't think, based on what I know and what we've seen in the investigation, that he will ever bring himself to tell us what happened.
I know this is hypothetical, but had Chris Watts not confessed in this case, how tight was this case? I mean, was there a lot of evidence out there? Because I know that as far as the murders, there wasn't a lot.
There was a lot of circumstantial evidence that really, I think, was strong evidence.
There was a lot of evidence that wasn't tested as well, Mickey.
Law enforcement shows up right at the outset based on this call from her friend Nicole saying, I need you to come check on the welfare of Shanann. When her car is there, her purse is there, her cell phone is there, the house is locked up from the inside in a way that no one could lock a door and run out a garage door, for example. The key code on the garage door didn't work. There was no way for a stranger to get in there, abduct them or anything else, signal to us that it probably, at that early stage, probably was a family member, probably was the defendant. But then you start to really look at the manner in which they were killed, where their bodies were dumped, his familiarity with that area, and I think there were a lot of pieces that could be put together even without him talking, but it certainly made it a much stronger case because he ultimately did give us at least a version of what he wanted us to believe, even though we know all of it wasn't the truth.
Do you think he's a psychopath or sociopath? And I don't know if he was actually examined and diagnosed at any point.
If he was, I don't know. Obviously, I don't have the ability to ask for that.
He just told people what he wanted to, really, didn't he? He just tried to minimize everything, make you feel sorry for him. Poor Chris. That's exactly what he was doing. No spine, no backbone. Just an absolute tool of a man.
From a clinical standpoint, I don't know. There is certainly something wrong with a guy who annihilates his family for a new love affair. There's something wrong with him.
A love affair that you didn't look into properly.
Again, from a clinical or insanity standpoint, certainly not. There were no signs of that at all. But how do you do this?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you've been a part of several big cases, but is this one at the top of your list in terms of what you'll remember?
I will never forget this case. This is at the top of the list of horrifying things that we have seen people do to each other.
It's all like that. Okay. If you want to get a few kind of ways, stay here.
Thank you for watching. Thank you to Destronic for sponsoring the video. Once again, go to destronic.co.uk for a motorized desk. Use code PADDY. Thank you to the mods. Thank you to the members. The videos will be returning to a normal pace now. I've sorted most of the copyrights out. Thank you for being patient. You're all amazing. Thank you for your support. Remember, these cases can be emotional and stressful, so most of all, don't have nightmares. Paddy out. Go and check out Deadline Crime. I did 2 interviews with Jen earlier on. I'll put the interview or interviews on my channel as soon as I get them off her. She's going to send me them. It wasn't planned. I just had an email and I had a bit of time, so I went on her channel. We had a good discussion about Watts. It's in 2 parts. I'll put them both together and release it on my channel as soon as I can. Tell you what a community expects is a thorough and extensive murder case. I tell you what the community expects. A thorough, should be without question. If you have unalived children, you shouldn't even get the choice. You should have fuck. I will put them on my Facebook. I was going to say then. I will put them on. Fuckity fuck. Is it raining? I think it's raining. I'm hungry now. Things should be turning to. Fuck. Mr. Man. Fuck. Try again. Let's start again. Take it from the top. And cut that bit out. Cut that out. I've got to stop working on so many videos at the same time. I'm confused myself now.